Hey folks, welcome back to DJ Tutorials, and we are going to be doing part 4 of the Fantasy Ring Design series. If you haven't done 1 through 3, please go back and do those so you know where we're at. I will leave the links down in the video description, and while you're at it, just make sure that you know how to do a couple things. I'm trying to reduce some of the redundancies for the tutorials that I do on my channel, so I have one on IES lights that you can see here, and I have quite a few on rendering jewelry in cycles. So I definitely suggest that you check those out. I'm going to be sort of blasting through a lot of the general materials stuff on this video. Don't think that you're kind of like left without anything to help you out. I have all of these here to help you do your rendering just fine in cycles. Okay, so make sure that you do that. Those are also going to be in the video description down below. Now, if you're following the channel closely, this is where you should be. Just an FYI to you. I just went through and made sure that all my tilt angles are good on the text that goes around the ring. And I just did a couple little quick changes to make sure that this is looking pretty much like what I want it to look like. One thing that I did that I didn't show you guys, if I go into edit mode and I go to the top view here, you can see that I have this ring selected. I just took this ring and I scaled it in a bit just to make it a little bit of a rounded section on the inside, more of a comfort, I guess you could say, design for the inside of the ring. You can feel free to do that. It helps when you're rendering it out and you see the back side that it has a little bit of a rounding to it. Now, one fix that we're going to do here is if we zoom in, you can see that the bevel modifier that we have here, since it's a procedural and it's not a actual change in the mesh behavior, what I want to do to sort of soften this really harsh edge is I'm just going to add another bevel here. And you can see that just adding that little bit of a bevel without me really doing anything, and I might just change this to a 0.05 or something like that. But you can see that after adding that bevel, if I take it off, you can see how harsh that angle changes. And if I turn it back on, you can see how nice and rounded that looks. So we can just sort of soften that and make it look a little bit more elegant. Now, the other thing that we're going to want to do here is also add a little bit of a bevel to our edges on the gemstones. So let's add a bevel here. And what we will want to do is take the angle here, just slide it down. And actually, what'll make this easier is if I just go to solid mode, just slide this down. And I just want to move it down to where I could see that all of the angles are being hit. And you can see that the bevel is pretty large here, so we're going to change the amount of the bevel. I'm just holding shift and reducing this down here. And we can increase the segments. We can see that it's nice and rounded just like that. So there's a before, you can see how harsh the edges are, and then an after, there's a little bit of a bevel. And that still is kind of a lot to me, so I'm just going to reduce that down to like a 0.003, something like that. You can see that now. It's a little bit more realistic because things in real life, there really aren't that harsh of edges on things. Everything has just a slight rounding to it, so I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to be adding the materials. And like I said before, I'm going to be blasting through some of these because I do have a whole lot of videos on this, but let's just do this really quick. So I'm going to split my panel here, go to the shader editor, and you can see that I have this set to multi-scatter, which just sort of helps to make this look a little bit more realistic. So with Node Wrangler installed, I can press Control T, and I can grab this here. My screencast keys doesn't seem to be working again because anytime I redo Blender, there always seems to be a problem. But these are all basic things. You really shouldn't need to see my button presses to know what I'm doing here. So I'm going to go to my maps here, which are the AMD Radeon Pro Render maps, and you can download a whole bunch of different stuff from like texturehaven.com. I'll put a link to the actual place down below where you can get that. But ProRender has a whole bunch of these free maps that you can get, which are pretty cool. And I'm going to grab something like this, which is called Metal Scratched. And we're going to change this to Object, because we're going to make this a procedural. And change this to Box. And let's actually get rid of this over here. And you can see that there's a black and white texture that now goes over my whole object here. Take the blend, move it up, and we will take the scale here. Let's actually look for an input value. So value here. Throw that right in there. And let's see, let's just move this to something like, I don't know, that seems fine. We'll do that right there. And now if we look through here, we have the image that is projected on there, so there's that color there. But really what we want to do is we want to take this And we want to put this into the roughness value right here. So there's our roughness map. Looks pretty cool. And I'm not going to do as I normally would do with a lot of the IOR changes. I do have a metal node that you can use for your colors that uses all this IOR stuff. I'm not going to do that with this one. I'm just going to do some approximations here just because I don't want to waste anybody's time. I do go over all that stuff in my other tutorials. I'm just going to use a base color of something like that. So sort of like a darker, slightly yellow color there. And then, of course, we're going to throw a color ramp right there. And we can adjust this like that and pull the value. It seems like it's a little bit small. Let's pull that like that. And now we just have some little bit of scratches sort of all over our object here. And we can just take these and move it around. Now for this one, I'm actually going to change this one here to a non-color because it helps with the contrast. And we can get a little bit more unique coloring when we change it. You can see there it says non-color. If I go to sRGB, see how it changes the color? We can get a lot more of a wider gamut range if we do it like this. So, and I'm actually going to take this one, and we're not going to do full on white. We're just going to add a little bit of a scratchiness over the surface there. Maybe something like that right there. Okay, so just kind of play with those values, see if you want to use the non-color. It's really up to you at this point. And of course, we're going to add a little bit of a bump map here and make this just enough to where we can see some sort of bumpy texture on the surface. So this again is going to be up to you to do, but it helps to add a little bit of realism like that. Now the other thing that we're going to want to do here is if we want to age this properly, have some sort of aging property to this, what we'll want to do is we will want to make it so that the cavities, all of these inset areas here, have, just a different sort of either texture or something like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a principled texture. So that's Control Shift T, and you can go to a texture where I got this right here, Rust Coarse. I can grab all of this here, click on this, and you can see that it automatically sets a set of principled textures, so I don't have to create all of the nodes. Let's actually turn this off for now. Move that and take a look here. And you can see that there's this sort of color, and that's because this is set to UV, and we're just going to change this to generated. All right. And just because we're going to end up moving this to something else, I'm going to change this to generated as well. So let's actually look at this, and that actually looks fine. And then for this down here, we're going to change all of these to box. And take the blend and move that up. And let's duplicate this value and put that right there. And that looks okay. So now we have these two items here. We can get rid of this because I'm not going to be using the displacement there. But we have these two items that have some different materials, and we want to mix these together with a mix shader, just like that. Alt, right click, and you can drag down like this to pull some of these around, which sometimes works in the right way, sometimes doesn't. And my mouse is actually doing some weird stuff right now where it's like double clicking, so I don't use it that much right now. But you can see that we can shift between our metallic and this rusty material here. And what we need is we need a black and white value to put into this factor so that we can control how this is being mixed. And what we're going to be using is an ambient occlusion node. So if we do a search, it actually shows up at the top, but you can type in ambient occlusion, but you can see that we have that right there. And if we take this and if we look through it, you can see that it is pulling a cavity. And if we click just local, let's actually go to a place where we can see this. If we click only local, you can see that that sort of changes color, okay? And around where our text is changes color as well. So you can see here that it slightly changes, and it'll be more apparent once we add a color ramp here. And then you can see I just pulled that black up a bit, and then I'm clicking just local or only local, and you can see how that's changing there. Okay. Now, when you use the ambient occlusion node for the first time, it will tell you that your GPU, or if you're on GPU rendering, it will tell you that it needs to build the shading information. So just give it a minute to do that. But anyway, there we go. And if we take this and we pull this over to our mix shader, and it looks like it's reversed. So what we can actually do here is we can pull an invert node, and we can invert those values, and now we have that rusty material that's underneath there. And if we pull this black value up, you can see that the rust is now coming through more and more, just like that. And that's how you can get a aged effect or a dirt effect that goes between objects using the ambient occlusion, which looks really, really cool. So I know that this is fun to play with, and adding a lot is, it might be fun for you and all that, but I know that it can kind of start to look a little bit bad if you do too much of this. So I'm going to just add this in here, and we're going to pull this over like this. And we're just going to use a bit. We're not going to go too crazy. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to do here is, instead of this normal map, we're going to be using a bump map. And I'm going to be taking this normal, this normal right here, and I'm going to take this roughness actually and put it into the height, and then put that into the normal, because if I look through there, it just adds a little bit more depth to it. You can see that if there is no normal, it just kind of looks sort of flat-ish, but if I add this sort of more detailed bump map, you can see that it gets a little bit more raised up and bumpy, so that's kind of why I wanted to have that there. So the next thing that we're going to want to do here is basically take this information and move it to our other material. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but hopefully all that made sense to you. I'm actually going to move this up here and take all this and move it right here, just so that it's a little bit more clear what's going on. Now there's two ways that you could do this. You could actually link all these together and make a new material and just change the color for all of the gold material. But what we're going to do instead is we're just going to grab all of this by using the marquee selection inside of the node editor. And I'm just going to click on the gold here and paste it right in there. And this gold that's right here, I'm just going to take this hex value and copy that, and I'm going to move it over here like this, and then Control Shift left click, and now we're looking through there. So you can see that now we have the same type of material, just a slightly different color, and it is looking really cool. And you can do some different changes and stuff like that on this one as well. If you want the gold to look a little bit different, that's really going to be up to you. And I'm actually going to take this gold color and let's make it a little deeper. Let's do something like that, so it's a little bit more deep. The other thing we can do is we can add some aging to this gem as well in a very, very similar way. And all we're going to do is we are going to hit Control T after we have the principled BSDF selected here. Control T just to add this texture. Open, and I'm going to go back to my maps. And again, this is just from ProRender, so really easy for you to get. And we're just going to click this stone marble gray here. You can pick anything you want, but this might look cool. I'm going to take the texture coordinate, change that. And again, what I'm using here is Node Wrangler, which is easy to turn on by going to Edit, Preferences, and then in the add-on section, looking for Node Wrangler and just turning that on. It's really, really nice tool to use. So we're going to take this, use a color ramp for a converter, and just throw that into the roughness here. And you can see that it's starting to look already kind of neat because there's a little bit of aging that's going on. So that can be really fun. I'm just going to pull this up a little bit and look through here and take a look at that. So depending on what you really want it to look like, and this is also going to depend on the kind of lighting you have, a little bit like that can go a long way, because we're also going to add a bump map here, take that and pipe it right in there. And of course, put this down to a really low number like 0.01 for the strength or something like that. So that's looking pretty cool already. A lot more realistic, a lot more fun look to it. But what's really going to make this gem look a lot better is we're going to be changing how the coloring is done. So I'm going to remove this by just putting a 1 in all these values here. And how are we going to color this, you may ask? We're going to simply use a volume absorption node, put it right into the volume like this, and we can change the color like that. And now we get a more awesome looking color where we can control the kind of sort of like based on the size of the area, well, basically the volume, it changes the color. So if you look at it from the side or something like that, it's going to be a lot more of this color versus if you looked at it at a more sort of like flat angle or where it's more shallow. So I think the final I did was like at a 0.5, and look how neat that looks. It's like a really cool aquamarine sort of color like that. Looks really, really cool. And you can change this to whatever you want. You can make this green. Some people really like the green color. Some people like the more reddish color like this. Some people like it to be an orange color. It really doesn't matter. It can be up to you. You can have sort of an analogous harmony with a more yellowish gold and an orangey gold here, and then a red or an orange for the gemstone. You can kind of do a lot of different things here. You can make it yellow. You can make it, more of a lighter color there if you want, and you can also increase the density if you'd like. It's really up to you on what kind of color you want from that point. So the next part of this tutorial is going to be more about explaining to you how you need to do your backgrounds and the lighting more than a demonstration. So you do need to know a little bit about this, but I'm going to go over this stuff anyway, just so that you're all aware of what I am doing. So if you go over to your world properties, you can set the surface to a background, okay? Background texture. And then inside of your shader editor, you can go into the world settings, and you can see here that I have some things that I've done. So I'm going to hide this background for the moment, and I'm just going to show you what I have right now. Okay, so this is after some lighting. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you and explain to you what I did. If I just remove this input color here and I change this to a white, you can see that it's just very, very plain. And you'll remember that before we had these things turned off. Okay, so this is what you would probably have. So if I turn on the scene world and I turn on the scene lights, then you're starting to see what I've done with my background. And basically what I did was I added a image texture here, which I got from HERA Haven. I'll give the link down below in the video description so you can download it. It's called Aircraft Workshop 1. And I added a mapping node and a texture coordinate, and I rotated on the Z to get the lighting set where I want it to be. So if I turn off the lights that I have inside the scene here, that is what the HDRI looks like by itself. And then I added this RGB curves, which then adds some contrast to the entire scene. And you can see here that the strength is at a 0.25, so it looks pretty cool, okay? Now for the lights, what I did, so I'm going to set this to the 3D viewport. Remember in the beginning of the tutorial, I mentioned that you need to kind of know something about IES lights. So what I did was I have an IES light that's up here. And if I go to the shader editor, you can see that if I go to Object, I have an IES texture. So you want to check out that video. You don't have to use an IES texture, but I did. Black body and an IES texture going into the emission. And I have the setting set like this here. So really, really low power output setting. You can see right there. And the radius is really low as well to get really harsh backlighting that looks kind of like that right there. Let's turn off that light and turn on the other one. And you can see that if I look at it in the viewport, I set the light over here, and you can see that I have these targeted with an empty, okay? So the IES light textures are pointed using a constraint that says track to the empty that's right there. So you can see that it's angled right there. And if I go to the shader editor, you can see that I have a much lower temperature for the black body, and I have another IES light texture right here, this scatter light, that I'm making it look like there's some sort of, I don't know, warm light, maybe fire or something that's cast onto the ring from this side like that. So for the next light right here, you can see I used an area light. And if I turn it off, you can see right on the front, this is why I like to use the area light. If I turn it on, you can see it has that nice reflection. Okay, so we can see some of the texturing on the front of that gemstone right there, and we can actually control where that is. And again, I have this set to where the plane that I have right there is tracked to that empty. So anywhere I move this, the lights are going to follow. And you might have also seen that the camera went out of focus, and that's because the depth of field is also set to that target. So I'll talk about that in a second. But you can see there that I have that set to be kind of like a reflection of just getting that gemstone lit up enough to look really, really, really cool. The next thing here is I have this camera set up in a square so that you can use this on your Instagram or whatever it is that you want to use. Square compositions tend to work better for social media and for phones and stuff like that. So I set it up for a square. And you can see here under depth of field, I set it to the empty and I have an f-stop of 0.5. The next thing I did was I created a backdrop, which is basically just a ramped plane. You can see it back there. Okay, so it's angled because I didn't really want to make all of these applied and have to, use this as an object to rotate it. I just took the backdrop and I just created a ramp like this. So let me just hide this really quick and I'll show you how this is done. Make sure your target is in the middle here, your 3D cursor. You add a plane like this, go into edit mode, grab the back edge, E to extrude on the Z there. See that? And then if I select this edge, Control B to bevel, and you can roll up or down on the mouse wheel and you can add subdivisions and then shade it as smooth and then just rotate it and scale it according to where you want to set it on your scene here. Okay. So I just kind of rotated it. So you can see here in the wireframe, I just kind of rotated it so that it was underneath it like this. And I believe I actually extruded this back edge straight up from the rotation after I rotated the plane so that it was kind of like angled here and then it goes straight up like this. So if we turn it on, you can take a look at it and you can see that's basically what I did there. So there it is. And the material to get it looking as cool as it is very, very simple actually. So if we go to the rendered view here, you can see here is the roughness is all the way up. I have a base color of black, and then I just set the specular to a really low value. And then I added this clear coat right here, and then added some roughness to the clear coat. You can see here, you can have it be really reflective like that, or you can have it be a little bit more like that. So it looks kind of cool, okay? So that's how I made that right there. It looks pretty neat. So what you want to do for your final render here is go to your render properties, go to sampling, and then in your render here, see I have this set to the max samples of 4096, which is the default, which is fine because I really want a high quality render. I remove denoise because I usually don't like how denoise looks, but that's really up to you and how long you have to render. And what we're going to do is go to light paths here. You can see that I have fast GI approximation checked on. So make sure that's checked on. I set it to 32. You can probably get away with 16 or something less like that, but I'm going to set it to 32 anyway. Clamping, make sure you're at 10. Leave the caustics alone. They're fine. And for the performance, you'll want to check off the use tiling. You shouldn't need tiling for this because it's a pretty light file, I think. So you shouldn't really need to use tiling for this. So remove that as well. And from there, we can save this file. And I'm going to change it to solid view here. And we will render this out. I'm actually going to set this to 150 for now. My final would be something like 300%, and then I would squeeze it down. But let's just do 150%, and then I'll see you at the back end when we do compositing. Okay, so there we go. Looks pretty awesome. I would normally do this at a much higher resolution, but this will work for you guys and with the compositing part that we're going to do right now. So I'm just going to move this over to my other screen and let's go into the compositing. And I already have some stuff in here, so let's fit this to the background. So basically what you'll need to do is, see this where it says use nodes, you'll want to click that on and you're going to want to add some stuff here. So let's go through this easily one at a time. So you're going to start off with this right here. Okay, so let me just move these over to the side here. You're going to start off with just this image. Okay, it's going to look just like that. It looks pretty good as it is, but there's more stuff that we can do. Okay, so what you'll want to do is you'll want to add, as always, a glare node. But you'll notice if you do add the glare node, and if we look through the glare node here, and I'm just going to set this to low, you're going to have something that looks a little bit like this, okay? So it's going to be pretty bright and it might be a little bit too much, okay? So this tone map node right here, if I go between the two, you can see how much brighter that is. If I go to then this one, you can see how it dulls that out. It basically, what it does is it will clamp a lot of the values and you can sort of change what goes into your glare node from here. Okay, now you don't have to do this, but you'll notice if you don't do that, and you do the next part, which I'm actually going to talk about this later. But if we take this node right here, which is a color mix node, and we change this to add, and you take your glare node here, and we're going to see this mix, go all the way over to 1, that'll make a glow map for you, and then put that into the bottom of a color mix node, and then your original image, put that into the top, and change this top here to a add. And if we look through there, you can see how bright that is, and you can turn this down like this. And that actually works pretty well. But sometimes what'll happen is your image will be too bright and the glare node will be like really hard to add the coloring over the top. So if that happens, you can use this tone map, plug it into here, and then you can use the threshold and stuff like that to control it. And then through the add node, you can change it like that. So really up to you on if you want to use this method. I just thought that it looked kind of good depending on what was going on with your situation. So I think that looks pretty cool. Now, if you did a background that had an alpha channel, so if you didn't do this color ramp or color background that I did here, you can throw it into here like this, a color mix node. And if you look through there and you check on this alpha, you'll actually be able to have a properly cut out uh, color comp of your final. And then you can just change this top to a black color or whatever color you want. Or if you have a background that you want to plug in there for an image, you can do that as well. So just saying you could do that, but I ended up not doing that here. So then with that add node there, let's actually turn this down a bit because it's a little strong. What we can then do is throw it into a color balance node. And there is the color balance node. And you can see here, it's got all these cool color wheels and you can pull these around and add some contrast and just change the overall tone of your image by messing with these. And these will automatically be in the center, all these little points right here. And you can see that it looks pretty neutral there. You can take these color wheels, hold shift and left click to drag it around, and you can see that I'm coloring the film now. So you can get some really nice colorful film effects and a really nice general coloring by changing these around and altering the overall look of your image. And some of these you can do pretty extreme. I would say, do what you feel is right for you as far as the coloring effect. Since this is already a pretty good looking image, it'll be hard for us to sort of mess it up. And then from there, if you take your render results here and you change this to your viewer node, that's your final image, save as, and you can render out your jewelry ring. And there you go. So with a couple other adjustments, you will want to definitely increase the amount of resolution in your final. So bump that percentage up to like a 300 or something like that. But with a couple adjustments, you can have a really awesome looking final image that looks similar to this here by following this tutorial series. Hopefully you all learned something, and I really would like to see what your ring ended up looking like. It would be awesome if you could tag me in your Instagram or on Twitter or whatever it is. You can see my YouTube channel has all those handles, so you can tag me in that. And I'd love to see your renders, and I'd actually like to showcase some of those. So make sure that you tag me in that. It'd be awesome to see the results. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you're able to make it all the way through this series without too much of an issue. And if you did run into any problems, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below or join me on the Discord server. The link is going to be in the video description down below. Thanks so much to all my patrons. You guys basically give me the inspiration to keep going with these tutorials. So thank you so much. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.